Joanne. And
Hello,
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
How are you?
How are you?
You, maybe Brad, for this, we're reading in search for you, the doc, that's your choice. Everyone in the audience will be back.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I think I will, because otherwise people won't hear me.
Right, yeah, so that can, you help.
Not sure I heard what you just said.
When we read in church, or I
Oh,
preach,
yeah,
I
yeah.
can take off, so she can take that off,
Oh,
we'll be all
I was
back.
gonna say the same
Speak,
thing
you
for
can take
people
your mask down.
talking in
I'll do
here.
that.
Oh,
Makes
okay.
me-
I know, I don't have a very
Right.
carrying sort of voice.
Yeah, it might be good actually to stand up so people can watch you when I ask the question. That also
Okay.
sometimes helps
Mhm.
project over. This looks beautiful.
Nice to
Thanks.
see you there. Thank you. I'm enjoying
Is
it.
your audio on?
Good to be there.
Because I want to make sure we
Yes.
can hear you on
The
the
only thing I'm
recording.
missing
My audio is on.
is
Okay.
the band.
Can you
I
hear?
guess when we get ready to do it, we want to take this strip of lights off,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, good, yeah.
I'm not sure.
That-
Oh,
that-
Wisconsin.
Leave the
Well-
sconces on, but the overhead lights maybe.
Yeah, the more lights we can turn off, the better the image on the screen will look.
Two more people coming on.
At least church is good. Yeah, it is. Nice to be here.
Great.
Cool.
So are you there full time or you're out of state like me? I spent some time in West Palm Beach.
Jenny?
Country Village.
Hey, Dad.
Hi, it's Dad.
I know, I see you. Well, I see your name. Hi.
Can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Okay, that's good to know. Let's see.
Chatham,
Oh, how are you?
Chatham D.
Can you still not hear me?
Oops.
Primarily, I live in Brooklyn, New York, with Sheepshead Bay.
Not getting any sound.
Okay, we're trying to figure that out.
I see on your microphone it going up and down for levels.
Okay.
Can you just ask him to check his speaker?
Dad, can you check your speaker?
You hear me?
I can hear you, but can you check your your speaker over on that end?
Yeah, say something, see if I can hear you.
Okay.
Holly,
Yeah, I'm definitely projecting.
Yeah.
Don't know why we're not getting.
Is she talking to you?
Yes, but I'm getting no noise from her.
Hi, Donna.
Are you on mute?
No, mute isn't working. Video is working.
Dad,
She hears me.
try checking what speaker is selected in the Zoom preferences.
Want to try it online?
Try what?
Want to try it online, computer? Hi, Jenny.
Hi. My parents.
Oh, okay. Got you.
You can hear us now? Dad, can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Phew.
Where do they live, Jen?
Just outside Boston.
Okay. Yep, we're good.
Oh, no kidding. Hopkinton for us.
Commute sometime to see our folks.
You say she
I'm
can't
going to go
see
down
you.
and see them next week.
Okay.
I'm actually going down to Princeton to do some research.
Oh, wonderful. Jen, how are you? Oh, wow. You fool me. Yeah, do you have a mask that you like? Do you want me to bring you one? Yeah. I can- let me know.
We all have piles stashed every place, don't we?
Masks down the hall, masks in here, we've got lots of masks. Right.
That wasn't on.
Yeah, you did pick the right place.
Very good choice. Yeah.
The only good thing about the heat is it makes my hair curl right up.
Jennifer?
That's good.
You're related to Dr. Booher.
I am. He's my father-in-law. Everybody knows Dean.
Right. Well, we used to go to things together,
Mhm.
the four of us.
Are they having the band concerts or they're not?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was canceled on Monday because of the rain,
Yes, I know that.
but they've been having it all the other nights.
Well, I still need a ride there, so I can't go.
Will Island Connections help with that?
What, honey?
Will Island Connections help with that?
No, I don't want to get involved with them.
Oh.
And they're not on time and you have to wait. No, thank you anyway.
Okay.
Well, I was always on time when I drove for Island Connections. I was never late picking anyone up.
I don't think they do that at night.
Oh, I don't think they do it at night either. I think it's mainly for going to
During the day,
doctors.
yes.
Doctors.
They're wonderful during the day. Magnificent.
Steen is my maiden name.
again?
Yeah,
I know it. How are you?
really?
You know him, didn't you?
No?
That was his first name. Well, that's for Thayer.
Oh, my goodness, no.
Because that's an unusual name.
Yeah, it's Dutch.
Scandinavian name is Stone.
Uh-huh.
I often wondered, so I just got something. Okay. Yes. How are you doing? How are you? I'm fine. Oh, take it, take it. There's anybody here?
Joanne is sitting there.
I haven't been out night, you know. Yeah, yeah. Hi, Thayer. Yeah, hi. How are you? And it's 3 days at work. You got fans there? We got 2,000.
Drink a little water. I have a pair of shorts on.
Sorry. Uh-huh.
One was from a family name. See, and his mother. So,
It's my maiden name.
he,
Mhm.
you just say you're Dr. Booher's daughter.
In-law.
In-law.
Yeah.
Okay,
His kids are Wendy and Brian.
yeah,
I'm married to Brian.
okay. So that's interesting, but still your maiden name was Dean.
Mhm.
Which is the last name, the Dean family.
Right.
And actually, a lot of the things, except the McCarran, he said everything. And there was one, Daniel Rodney King, changed his government.
Oh, okay.
And so we got a Rodney, son,
Uh-huh.
and Daniel, we had that in the family. So we're all just fine.
Yeah.
Where do you come from, your family?
Oh, we're mutts.
Huh?
We're mutts.
What
Some of
thing?
us came from Ukraine, half the family came from Estonia.
Oh, you're thinking of.
No, my great grandmother was Ukrainian.
Oh, okay.
My grandfather on that side was Irish, and my mother and her family came from Estonia.
The Irish prepared the steam, I think, in it.
Yeah, no, they
I
were. They actually got to Ireland through Holland.
Because I'm 80% Scandinavian,
Oh, wow.
second generation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm 50% Baltic.
For me,
I'm 50% Baltic.
I couldn't hear that.
Baltic.
Baltic, okay. But I knew my parents came from, so I. No brainer.
Yeah. You too.
Yeah.
I
I don't know.
I was muted, but maybe I want to say something. You expect to have a conversation?
If the phone rings.
All right. I'll,
Well, you can listen to what she's saying.
Jen, are you muted?
Sorry, what was that, Dad?
Yeah.
What was that? There are quite a few people coming in right now. We're just waiting for everyone to get seated before we start.
Any word?
to uncover what we may have here in our archives. And we unfortunately didn't find as much as we hoped to find, but she took pictures of every possible thing that might have an archival nature to it. But she is a historian, an artist, a speaker, she's a writer, a woman of all kinds of trades. If you want to see some of her artwork, go to her website, which is jennifer@jenbooher.com. She's got some very interesting art on there of the area. So take a look at that when you can. She's been an artist in residence at Acadia and MDI Historical Society. She's a recipient of the Frenchman's Bay Stewardship Award, author of Stained Glass of MDI. I would say that's why she's here. She's the expert. We've been blessed to have this kind of a resource here on the island. She's done photography all over and showing us how we have to keep looking for what we're after here. So I think I've said enough, and so I'll turn it over to you, Jennifer, for the evening's presentation.
Okay.
And thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Brad. All right. Can everyone hear me? Am I speaking loud enough out in the back?
A little loud.
Okay, I'll do my best. I find it really hard to talk loud enough. It doesn't come naturally. But if I start to like turn the volume down, just tell me and I'll talk louder. So if anybody here attended my talk at the Jessup, some of this introduction is going to sound familiar. And please think of it as that opening part of a TV show where they say, previously on our show, just bringing everyone up to date. So this project, oops, what am I doing? Okay, this project began as a short photo essay for the MDI Historical Society back in 2018. At the time, I had about 6 weeks to photograph, research, and write that essay. So I relied pretty much only on what information the churches had. And I was frustrated by how much felt like it was missing, just about who had made the windows and when they hadn't been installed. So even after that essay was published, all those questions kind of kept wiggling around in the back of my brain. And I love puzzles, you know, I just love figuring things out. So I started kind of looking things up and trying to figure it out, looking through old newspapers. I read some books. Then I found a bunch of online databases and I read some more books. And then I decided to write a book. And I've been traveling around the East Coast, going to various archives. And also everywhere I've gone for the last 4 years, I've looked at stained glass. So I know a whole lot more now than I did 4 years ago. And there is so much to cover. There's so much interesting stuff about the windows here. I'm gonna have to just like give you a little bit of everything, like who the donors are, who the artists are, how these windows fit into the art movements of the time, which is way more interesting than it sounds, trust me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what stained glass is and how the windows are made. We're going to start with like the absolute basics. What is stained glass? So what most of us would call colored glass has been called pot metal glass for centuries because the colors come from metallic salts blended into a pot of molten glass. Iron oxide makes red, copper oxide makes green, and so forth. This produces a glass that's colored solidly all the way through. The technique has been used since medieval times and fundamentally hasn't changed much. In medieval times, details like eyes, noses, and mouths were painted on with vitreous enamel paint, which is a dark brown or a black paint that's made of powdered glass mixed with iron, copper, and some kind of a liquid medium to make it flow. It has to be fired in a kiln to fuse it to the glass. So during the Renaissance, they developed a much wider range of colors of vitreous enamel paint, and enameling on the front of glass became common. It's less transparent and it's more painterly, and it's referred to as painted glass. And the thing to remember about painted glass is that the thicker that enamel gets, the more opaque the glass becomes. So what we now refer to as stained glass often incorporates all of these techniques in one window. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of glass, but there are three basic types that you see a lot here on the island: antique glass, cathedral glass, and opalescent glass. So in the early 19th century, glassmakers began trying to recreate the colors and textures of medieval glass, and they developed various types of handmade glass they called antique glass. Now, I found that super confusing. In fact, I still find it really confusing, but antique glass has nothing to do with age. It's a type of glass. It's usually hand blown. It's much thicker than modern window glass. It often has bubbles and like inclusions that sort of refract the light inside and make the colors richer and sort of livelier. It's much more labor intensive because it's hand blown, so it's much more expensive than normal window glass. Another type of glass that we see a lot in MDI windows is called cathedral glass. It sounds fancy, but it's not. It's a type of rolled glass made by pouring molten glass onto a metal or a graphite table and immediately rolling it into a sheet using a large metal cylinder, pretty much like a rolling pin on cookie dough. And the roller is usually embossed with a pattern, as you can see down here. Again, a lot like rolling cookies with a patterned rolling pin. So cathedral glass was and still is available in a very wide range of colors and textures. These are samples from the 1920s. Is there any way to turn off some of these lights? I think it's kind of hard to see this.
All or none, but
Okay.
we can turn them all off. That'll work. I don't know.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. So these are samples from the 1920s. On the left here is a cathedral glass window seen from the inside. So it's backlit with the sun shining through it. And on the right, it's the same window seen from outdoors. So when it's not backlit, you can see the texture a lot better. It tends to be smooth on the inside and the pattern is usually on the outside. Where's that? It became very common in the late 19th century, and it was, and still is, an inexpensive, readily available material. And now that I've pointed out, you're going to notice it all over the place. I promise. It's like in everybody's doors. So the last type of glass I'm going to talk about is opalescent glass. And this is really easy. Picture a Tiffany window. That's opalescent glass. It's streaked with color. It often has three-dimensional modeling. It's often a lot thicker, and it usually doesn't let as much light through as other types of glass. Now, there's a lot of diversity within each of those types of glass, but that's the fundamentals, and that gives us a place to start. So here's how a typical leaded glass window gets made. This is the presentation drawing Conic Studios did for the St. Francis and St. Christopher window. So every window starts with a drawing, usually an ink drawing with watercolor to give the client an idea of what the shape and color of the window will be. Once the client approves that, the glass studio will produce a full-size drawing called a cartoon with thick lines indicating where the leading will go. 3 copies of the cartoon are prepared. One drawing gets cut up and used as a template for cutting the glass pieces. Another will be used to lay out the cut pieces. As the window develops, the glass pieces get stuck to a large piece of clear glass mounted on an easel so the artist can see how the colors look together. Did I miss the page? Sorry, this is them laying out the cut pieces. Yeah, so sorry, I got lost. Any glass pieces that need details painted on them, like faces or clothing patterns, go to whoever in the workshop handles those. And once they're painted, they get fired in a kiln. Although there were workshops that used cold painting where the paint didn't get fired. And Tiffany did a lot of this. And so you do see a fair amount of Tiffany windows where the faces have almost disappeared, either from weathering or from well-meaning attempts to wash the windows and accidentally removing the paint. And there are other causes of deteriorating paint. Sometimes it's a chemical issue with the paint, and sometimes it wasn't fired properly. But this is the one that I find the most striking. So the finished pieces get set into what are called lead cames, C-A-M-E-S. It's in like an H-shaped bar, and the glass fits into those H sides, and then it's soldered together. The window gets waterproofed by rubbing putty into the joints, and then it's installed like this in a wooden or a metal frame. Now, in a small glass studio, one person might do all of these steps, but in larger companies like Tiffany or Franz Meyer of Munich, each of these steps would be done by one person who's specialized in that. You can see Tiffany was an enormous company. I think at their peak, they had something like 400 people, and Meyer had at least 300. Both of those companies produced thousands of windows. So they had a very streamlined working method where like the designer did designs, they didn't cut the glass, and the glass cutters didn't paint faces. And in fact, even the designers had specialties. So a window might have figures drawn by one artist set in a landscape drawn by a different artist. There were people who specialized in painting faces and others who did nothing but hands. Okay, coming down to bringing it home now. So Church of Our Father was designed by William Masters Kamek of Furnace Evans and Company of Philadelphia. Kamek came from an old Philadelphia family. He was a longtime summer resident in Bar Harbor. He's frequently mentioned in Philadelphia society columns and was part of Bar Harbor's summer social circles. One biographer refers to him as a gentleman architect, which makes me wonder what they called all the other architects. With apologies to my friends who are architects. So he designed several buildings here on the island, and he appears to have been in charge of all of the firm's business in Maine. Now, the original window glass here was cathedral glass. It was very common for churches, I think it still is, to use an inexpensive form of colored glass sort of as a placeholder waiting for memorial windows to be commissioned. So the photo on the right is of the window opening where the Whiting landscape window is now. This is the glass that was there before. So I'm going to present the windows through their family connections. I kind of struggled for a while with how to put all this in order. And a lot of the people represented by these windows were related to each other in one way or another. And some of those ways were pretty complicated, so I'm going to try and lay it all out that way. So the first set is the Prime and the Wurtz families. The building was commissioned by Mary and Cornelia Prime, built in 1890 as a model, a memorial to their respective parents. Cornelia and Mary were cousins. They were the grandchildren of Nathaniel and Cornelia Prime. Cornelia was from Huntington, New York on Long Island, and Mary was from Manhattan. Both of them were wealthy, socially prominent, lived into their 80s, and never married. Cornelia is on the left. She was known as a philanthropist, and her generosity in the communities Huntington and of Hulse Cove was well documented. She's really interesting. She didn't just fund building projects, like she funded the building here, but she also did like more personal things like bringing the Sunday school kids to her house for a treat. I think she brought them over and gave them tea and things like that. I'm always a bit skeptical when an obituary says that some wealthy person was a, what do they call it? A beloved benefactor, but I think I kind of got the impression that Cornelia was the real thing. The right-hand portrait is the only one I've found so far for Mary. Now, the grown-up is Mary's mother, also named Mary, so we're going to call her Mary the First. And our Mary, Mary the Second, is the older child on the right. The younger child is her sister Harriet. So Mary the Second's name appears in a remarkable number of New York City real estate transactions, like truly remarkable when I go through the newspaper records. So it looks to me like she was an active real estate developer and landlord. After her death, quite a few buildings, including several apartment houses, were sold off as her estate was settled. So on the left.
Excuse me, could you tell us about Huntington? You mentioned there the Reverend.
No, that's the town that Cornelia lived in, Huntington, New York.
It says something about the Reverend.
In the will.
Oh, he was the Reverend for Grace Church. I believe there's a window to him at St. Mary's.
And Grace Church was where?
New York City.
Got
Okay.
it. Okay, thank you.
They both of them left bequests to Church of Our Father, but I'm not sure if I cut that part off. Sorry. Any other questions? Okay. Huntington. So on the left are Frederick and Mary Prime. Those are Mary's parents. And on the right are Rufus and Augusta Prime, parents of Cornelia. Frederick and Rufus were brothers. They were the sons of Nathaniel Prime. Now, Nathaniel's interesting. He began as a coachman to a merchant in Boston. He moved to New York City in 1795, and he set up literally on Wall Street as a stock and commission broker, built a fortune, opened his own private bank. It became the chief banking house in New York for a while. He was the first president of the New York Stock Exchange. By 1830, he was named as one of New York's 5 millionaires, along with John Jacob Astor and 3 other millionaires I've never heard of. And he killed himself in 1840. Yeah. Frederick Prime went to Yale, became a lawyer. The only information I've been able to find on Mary is that she was a descendant of John Jay and died 18 days after giving birth to her 3rd child. There's a lot of tragedy, I'm afraid. Rufus also went to Yale. He became a merchant. And I'm afraid all I know about Augusta is that she had 4 children. There's not all that much on the women, unfortunately. Okay, so finally, down to the windows. So Church of Our Father has 9 stained glass windows that date from 1898 to 1993. So we've got almost a full century of stained glass styles and techniques. This is the Cornelia Prime Memorial Window. It was donated by her cousin, A.J. Wurtz. She had left him a pretty hefty sum in her will, so they must have been reasonably close, but I haven't found any indication of sort of how they knew each other. I'm guessing she was kind of an aunt figure. She was about 30 years older than he was, but he commissioned this window in her memory. The window was made by Reynold Francis and Rohnstock of Boston in 1924. It is, I can't tell you how amazing it is that we have 3 windows by Reynolds, Francis, and Rohnstock. They were a really important presence in the Second Gothic revival of the early 20th century. And I know that probably doesn't mean a whole lot yet, but hang on, we'll get there. This one in particular was made during their very first year of being in business together. So it's just very cool if you're a glass geek. So 5 of the 9 windows here were either made during or come out of the Gothic revival movement. So I think it's worth talking just a little bit about that. We don't really have time to go into the whole genesis of the architectural history of Gothic revival. Super complicated with nationalism, politics, changes in church liturgy. But at least in stained glass, you can kind of simplify it as a reaction to Tiffany style windows. which were essentially part of the Art Nouveau movement. So the style of glass in that type of window, which was made by dozens of firms. Tiffany was not the only one working in this style, but Tiffany's genius was in marketing. Like Tiffany was such a good marketer that 100 years later, we all think Tiffany when we see this type of window. Brilliant. But this type of glass, the glass itself, as well as the construction technique, was so radically different from everything that had come before. It was called American glass. Like in Paris, they had exhibitions of American glass, and they meant this. Sorry, I need my reading glasses. I've been in denial about that. So I'll talk more about Tiffany and Opalescent glass when we get to the resurrection window. But for now, the important points are that the American style was essentially pictorial. The artists were trying for a sense of depth and a certain degree of realism, and also that American glass was very thick and did not transmit light well. So glass artists in the Gothic revival called for a return to translucent glass and renewed attention to the quality of the light coming through the window. They were very interested in the art of manipulating light. And they also argued that stained glass windows should really be thought of as part of the architecture, part of the plane of the wall, and not as pictures that gave an illusion of looking out through the architecture. And I think you can really see the difference there in what they were trying to do. So the architect Ralph Adams Cram was one of the most active promoters of the Gothic style, very prominent in design of churches and university buildings. He's a major reason why every university library looks like a Gothic cathedral and why every cathedral looks like a Gothic cathedral in New York City, where, you know, we didn't have the Gothic period. Now in stained glass, Charles Connick was the equivalent mover. Both of them, Cram and Connick, wrote a lot of books and articles popularizing their ideas. They gave very popular lectures all over the country, sort of promoting their philosophy of color and light. So Reynolds, Francis, and Rohnstock, the makers of this particular window, met while they were working in Charles Connick's studio. So they were part of the whole movement. They were an integral part of the beginning of that. They did a lot of work for Ralph Adams Cram, and they were a very important firm in the Gothic movement. They've got windows at Riverside Church in New York City, Princeton University Chapel, Wellesley College Chapel, St. John the Divine in New York, although I have to say pretty much every stained glass artist of any importance has a window at St. John, but also the American Church in Paris. In other words, very prominent, pretty important firm, and their company papers have been archived at the Smithsonian. So, and we've got 3 of their windows. So, oh, and one note about this, I don't know if, I didn't notice this until I was editing the photographs, but the Hallelujah is backwards. And I don't know if it was painted that way or if the quatrefoil was installed reversed.
It's front, yeah. The word on the bottom. Right.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah. So this one, also by Reynolds, Francis, and Rohnstock, installed in 1925, and it was given by Edith Van Rensselaer Hurd in memory of Jeannie Child Wurtz. Now, Jeannie was the first wife of A.J. Wurtz, who donated the Cornelia Prime window. I don't know how Edith Hurd is related to Jeannie. I haven't figured that out yet. Eventually, I'll figure it out. Oh, there's the Reynolds, Francis, Rohnstock signature. One really unusual thing about Church of Our Father is that almost all of your windows are signed. That is really unusual. There's only one that's not. There's one that I haven't personally seen the signature, but I'm told it's there. That's the big round one over the altar. So this is the original contract and the job order. Found these in the Smithsonian.
Oh.
Yeah, we actually have the contract and the job order for all of the Reynolds, Francis, and Rohnstock windows, also the Connick and the Willett. I was very excited. So a couple of interesting points here. I don't know if you can read those, but the job order notes the quality and the direction of the light. It notes that it's strong southeast light. And this is important because a good glass artist will tailor the type and the color of the glass to the exposure of the window. So a southern exposure that has direct sunlight, much brighter light, you'd want glass that would soften that and wouldn't get lost in the glare. Whereas for a northern exposure, there's no direct light, and you want to make sure that the glass isn't too dark and doesn't get lit up by the sunlight that does come through. And it also notes the square footage, which I'm always interested in because one of the ways that windows were priced was by the square foot and by the complexity. So in this example, this is actually from 1880, so it's a lot earlier, but the plain geometric windows up at the top there, those were monochrome, and those were 6 shillings a square foot. Now this one, much more complicated, much larger, is 35 shillings a square foot. So the more figures you have, the more expensive it is. And then it's calculated by the square foot. So this one is a little more than 5 times the cost of that, going by square foot. Okay, this is the last one by Reynolds, Francis, and Roanstock. This was installed in 1932 in memory of Alexander J. Wurtz. Finally, you get to hear about him. He's been involved with the other 2 windows. It was given by his second wife, Elizabeth Reed Wurtz. I believe they were married in 1927, and their summer home was Canoe Point. I haven't found anything much on her, unfortunately, but Alexander J. was an electrical engineer. He graduated from the Sheffield Scientific School at Yale, became a professor of electrical engineering and the head of the department at Carnegie Tech. He was a warden of this church and very active, apparently, in the Hulls Cove community. So this is where, oh, shoot, I forgot to show you his picture. This is AJ. Okay, this is why I tried to put all these windows together. So remember how Frederick Prime's wife was Mary Rutherford J., Mary the First? So Mary the First's brother, John, married Frederick's sister, Laura. So John and Laura were AJ's grandparents, making Cornelia and Mary his cousins. It took me a while to figure that out. Does that come across here? Okay, good.
My mom always told me that Time's sister, she never said cousins.
No, they're cousins.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. You can even see in the plaque that's in the church, it lists the 2 sets of parents. Oh, right. One thing to note here is that figure of Sir Galahad. So, he's a character from the Arthurian cycle, the purest of the knights destined to find the Holy Grail. Well, this particular image of Galahad in the window is based on, or strongly influenced by, Victorian and pre-Raphaelite illustrations, which almost always showed him as a young man with curly strawberry blonde hair. And given this is 1932, I found that really interesting. And I wondered if somebody's favorite Arthurian storybook got shown to the window designers. I mean, you can see the hair in all of these. It's such a strong influence. Okay, the next family group is the Whitings. So the cherub window above the altar was made by Donald MacDonald of Boston and apparently installed in 1898. MacDonald had immigrated from England in 1868 and very quickly became one of the leading glass painters on the East Coast. He was known for some very creative techniques using vitreous paints and stains and semi-transparent enamels. He was one of the people during this period who was experimenting with layering glass. It's called plating. And I think that the clouds below the 2 figures are a colored or a streaky form of opalescent glass with kind of a cloudy white glass laid over it, which gives it softens all those streaks like that. I haven't been able to get up there to really get a good look at it. So his daughter Flora worked in the firm, and she became a very well-known glass artist in her own right. She was one of the first American women to become prominent in the field. She was a leading force in the company by the time this window was made, and it seems highly likely that she worked on it, which I'm thrilled to find, and we have work of hers here. So the window was given in memory of Guy Fairfax Whiting, who was 1 at the time of his death, and Carlisle Fairfax Whiting, who was 2. That was given by their grandmother, Mary Van Doren, who had a summer home in Hulls Cove. Now, the faces appear to be portraits, and it's possible that they're of the brothers, but this was done 11 years after Carlisle died and 13 years after Guy had died. And the other thing that I find curious about this is the window was given 8 years after the church was built and a decade after the boys had died. And I'm very curious about what prompted the gift. Like, why give the window and why then? Yes?
I don't know the answer to that, but they were brothers,
Yes,
and, Guy apparently, can you hear me through my mask?
I can. Yeah.
I Wurtz and Sarah Virginia, and then Carlisle died. He was buried in New York, and apparently they moved Guy to New York.
Oh,
But I don't know, really don't know a lot about it. They
Yeah.
were my mother-in-law's brothers,
oh, really?
yeah. And
Are you-
actually, the one on the left.
Are you Sheila?
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, the one on the left actually looks like my mother-in-law.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I definitely want to talk to you about the other Whiting window, which is about to come up.
All right.
So yes. This is your window, right? So this window was given in memory of Julia Whiting. Where's my notes here? So she was the sister of the 2 babies in the previous window. Guy died before Carlisle was born, and both of them died before Julia was born. If they had lived, they would have been her older brothers, but they were babies, so it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. The window was given by Sheila and Carlisle Cochran.
At the request of Julia Whiting.
I did.
At the request of Julia Whiting.
Okay.
Just for fun, I mean, I thought that was kind of interesting. She really wanted a window to love the church.
I definitely want to talk to you afterwards. I want to hear all about that. The window was made by Fred and Candace Jackman of Fayette, Maine. And yes.
Candace doesn't want her husband's name in there.
Oh, she had told me that I should credit it to the 2 of them.
Oh, you've spoken to her recently?
Well, last year.
Oh, fine. That's great. Yeah, just, I'm talking 10 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Good, perfect.
I guess whatever the trouble was, they made it up. Okay, so Candace and Fred Jackman of Fayette, Maine, and installed in 1985. And I had contacted Candace, and she sent me a photo of the working drawing. And clearly I need to go visit Candace and take a better photo. So since the Jackmans aren't really well known, and I think that they ought to be, I've actually come across their work in several other churches as I've done my research. I'm going to give you just a really short bio. They were both born in 1949. They were married in 1968. They began working in stained glass in 1977, did a lot of sales through craft fairs. Candace attended Haystack School in 1982, and they became full-time glass artists. Fred also went to Haystack in 1983. They worked in stained glass from 1982 to 2007 when Fred retired. And since 2010, Candace has worked entirely in mosaic, and it looks like she has a pretty extensive international clientele. Okay, the resurrection window. See, it doesn't transmit as much light as the others. So this one was made by Tiffany Studios, installed in 1928. It was donated in memory of Emmeline Furman Parsons by her daughter Rosalie Coe Slack. The scene, often called Noli Me Tangere, which I know I have a terrible American accent, I'm sorry, from the Gospel of John, shows Christ's appearance to Mary Magdalene after the resurrection. It's a very common theme in Christian art, and it's instantly recognizable. Whoops, sorry, Tiffany signature. There's the instantly recognizable pose of the figures, Mary kneeling and Christ gesturing to keep her at a distance. It was a very popular subject for late 19th and early 20th century stained glass. These are examples by Heaton Butler and Bain, John Lafarge, and Alexander Gibbs. I'm not sure which of the Tiffany artists drew the original for this image. There are several whose style it really looks like. Yeah, but it was used many times and adapted for a wide variety of window shapes. Yes?
Do you have any information connecting the family name with immigrants, that is, people moving around the US?
Which family name?
Well, Parsons, that's my family name.
I don't have any genealogical info on the Parsons
Okay,
family,
well,
I'm
there's
sorry.
supposed to have been one brother of Parsons who went to Maine.
Oh.
And one settled Massachusetts and one went out west and disappeared.
Wow.
That's about all I know. I just wondered if you had any network.
No, I'm sorry.
tracking this brother.
No, I haven't really
Thank
looked
you.
beyond the immediate family. Sorry. So this particular drawing got used many times, adapted to a wide variety of window shapes. And these photos, by the way, are from the Tiffany census. And if you're interested in Tiffany's work, I highly recommend looking at this. It's an online database, and I've got the URL for it up at the top of the screen there. But all you do is if you do a Google search for Tiffany census, it'll bring you right there. It's something that Wayne Boucher has been working on for like 10 years, and it's absolutely brilliant. So there's two really interesting glass techniques in this particular window. One is plating, which we talked about a little bit on the Donald McDonald window, but you can see it better here because I could get a lot closer. So if you look at the sleeve of Christ's raised arm there and at the trunk of the tree in the background, it's super hard to photograph this, but you can see how there's an underlying layer of a very streaky glass. Like, see how streaky the sunset is, the sky? So the glass beneath is like that kind of hard edge streakiness. And then probably a pale blue textured glass has been laid over it. So it now has that kind of cloudy, softened feel to it. And I think on the tree trunk, there's at least 3 pieces of glass, each of which has a different pattern and color of modeling. Yeah. And if we were to go look at the window from outside, which we could do later, we would be able to see how they built those layers up. One of the interesting things that I've noticed about Tiffany windows, as opposed to John Lafarge's windows, Lafarge was probably Tiffany's main competitor artistically. Lafarge's windows, he tends to build them up into the building, and Tiffany builds them up out of the building. And it's a very interesting difference in the effect. But it's a lot, we can go look outside the window afterwards and take a look at that. So the other thing we have here is drapery glass. It's just about impossible to photograph because it's 3-dimensional, and no matter where you stand, there is going to be a reflection and glare, unless you turn all the lights off, and then you can't see it. So what drapery glass has been, they throw it onto a metal table, and then they use tongs to manipulate it. They pull it and twist it until it falls into folds that look almost exactly like cloth. And the piece up in the top left-hand corner there is a modern piece that's been done that way. I thought it was a lot easier to see it from the side. Whew, sorry, I've been running on a bit. I think I'm gonna have to speed up. Okay, this one was made by Connick Associates of Boston and installed in 1958. Now, this was done long after Charles Connick had passed on. His company outlasted him by, I think, 50 years. But a lot of excellent artists worked there, trained there, and kept it going. So this one was given by Paul and Lisa Renshaw, and I have not had a chance to look them up or find anything out about them. If anybody does know them or know about them, I'd love to hear your stories. Interesting things on this one, the artists created a foliate design, like a kind of a leafy pattern in the blue glass. You can see up on that side, which gives it some depth and makes the light, it kind of breaks up the light and makes it refract a lot. So the window feels less static. There's a lot more movement in it as the light plays over it. And then the other thing is that this is a really good example of a technique where the artist will paint a very, very thin layer of black or dark brown over the colored glass and then scratch into it to remove the paint and let the colors show through, rather than, it's more like scratch board, rather than drawing the color on, they're removing it. And that again is part of the original job order for that window. And this one is by Willett Windows. It was installed in 1968. Now, Willett Windows was another one of the really big firms in the Gothic revival movement. This was done again long after the original founders had retired or passed on, but this was the second generation of Willets. William Willett and Anne Willett started the company. This was Henry Lee Willett, who was in his own right a very well-known and respected glass artist. And their son, Crosby, took the company over after this. And I think that there's a fourth generation of Willets now. This company is still in business.
Could they be related to the Willett Hauser company? Which is
Yes.
doing our restoration.
Yes, exactly. Oh, they're doing the
Yeah,
restoration?
they're doing the restoration of the two windows.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, Willett and Hauser something or other joined in the 70s, I think. So yeah, it's a continuation of the company.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually that's where, do I have them on here? Yeah, this is the original presentation drawing. So Willett Hauser has all the original documents for this window, including, they sent me this photo. So they've been taking good care of their records. Oh, and again on this one, no, sorry, going the wrong direction. You can see on this one again how they've done that thin layer of black paint and then scratched it away to let the light come through. Yeah, I wish I had more time to go into the details of the people involved with this. It was given by Lois Thayer in memory of her grandparents, her husband, and her son. Her grandfather on the left, A.J. Cassatt, had been the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and he was the brother of the Impressionist painter Mary Cassatt. And this is the first time in my entire project where I've gotten to identify a man by his relationship to a woman. So, yay. So Edward Thayer, Lois's son, was killed in action in the South Pacific during World War II. And then her husband, John Thayer, had survived the sinking of the Titanic and wrote a book about his experiences many years later. He was a banker and a trustee of the University of Philadelphia. And after his son died, he killed himself.
Oh.
Yeah. And I haven't read the whole book. I've just read excerpts from it, and it is very vivid and very disturbing. I mean, it's an excellently written piece. If you're okay with it, it's very disturbing. And this is our last and most recent window. And I'm hoping that some people here will be able to tell me more about how this window came to be. It was made by Paul Blaney of New Brunswick, installed in 1993. Blaney is a really cool figure. He was born in London. He moved to New Brunswick. He became a very well-known artist with large-scale installations all across Canada and some in the northern US as well. He's got a very distinctive style. You can, once you've seen one or two of his works, you can pick him out of a lineup anywhere. And I personally really like his work. He died in 2019. So one item that's still on my to-do list is to find and contact his family to see if they kept his records. There's a little bit of information in the church records. There's a list of the people in whose name donations were given to fund this window, but I haven't heard anything yet about why it happened at the time that it did, whose idea it was, who made this happen. I would really love to find that out. And also, who chose Blaney? How did his name come up? He's not, I mean, he's huge in Canada and an amazing artist, but he's not well known in the States.
Jen, I think I can help you with that later.
Yes, that's part of the point of giving these talks, is so I can tell people what I don't know. And I think that is it. I think that's all my time too. Any questions? Oh, wait, sorry. There's a picture of Paul Blaney. So, questions?
Miss Prime in her will
Mhm.
gave $3,000 into this. And how much at that time in 1924? So how many windows would that purchase? Installed.
I had not heard that she left money for stained glass.
Well, I saw the will on the board there, and the amount was $3,000.
I have to go back and look at that. I missed that. I know that she left money to the Episcopal Diocese for the upkeep of Church of Our Father and to fund ministers or reverend services.
I thought it was the windows.
Like I said, I have to go back.
It said, it also said chapel. Church of Our Father. It was in
That was
will right at the beginning.
Yep. I'm gonna go back and take a look. At the time that she passed away, this was not,
In general, how much did a stained glass window cost?
you remember
Depending on size.
the ones that I showed you where there was the simple ones and then the big elaborate one? That big elaborate one in 1880, I believe, cost 200 pounds. Well, that's probably not going to translate well. I'm not sure. I can't convert the dollars in my head, but let's see.
There, see it right there, but in the middle. They include $3,000 for the Chapel of Our Father Holy School. Quest. It did, but it didn't say for
Follow
windows.
the
It
light.
just said
Yeah.
request.
Yeah, they left money to Church of Our Father for its upkeep and
Okay.
staffing, basically.
Jen?
Yep.
We're gonna lose the light. And I
Okay.
wondered if this might be a good transition to go see the windows before we lose the light so that we can point some things out, maybe.
Sure, we can do that. I think
mean,
there's
I won't get-
already not going to be enough light to really see them, but we knew that when we scheduled it at 7. But what we could do is when we're all finished, go outside and look at the outside of the Tiffany window and the outside of the McDonald window.
With
Which-
the lights on in the church.
Yeah, and you might be able to see the plating at that point.
Then would you mention the talks that you're gonna give,
Oh.
upcoming talks, because I think
several of us will want to go
Hang on,
to the
let me-
other part of the series.
Yep, okay, come here.
And the folks online are thanking you for your.
Oh,
wonderful
thank you.
presentation. Yes. The dates that you were looking for them? Oh, there we
There we
go.
Yeah, they
So-
better have, I'm related to half of them, the folks online.
So August 10th is at Holy Redeemer,
Mhm.
and then August 23rd is at St. Saviour's, and we're looking for a date later in the summer or early September for a talk on the stained glass window at St. John's Vine in Southwest Harbor. So
Yeah.
thank you, Jen, for your amazing photographs of all of the windows. I mean, it really is quite stunning. And next, was August 3rd, Maryland's gonna announce another event we have coming up, and then we'll move. I just want to give you all a heads up that August 3rd, which is a Tuesday, at 12:15, we'll be having another service for Ukraine held at St. Saviour's. So we'll be having something written about that coming up for you. Yeah, so that will be on the docket. August 3rd.
All righty.
Thank you again.
All right, everybody online, thank you for coming.
Looks like they were all set.